Now 9:13.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Live from the New Scientist Labs, Janine Young, newscientist.com.
Janine Young joining us in Canberra today. G'day there, Janine.
Good morning, Wammo.
Today we're kind of focusing on, I suppose, on the body, you could say. First of all, we're looking at the brain and brain size, human brain size that is.
For a very long time it's been assumed that we are the most amazing species on the planet because we have the most amazing brains. It is the biggest for our size, it's packed with neurons, we have special brains. Except for the fact it appears now that we don't. There's a researcher from the university in Brazil who's been looking at the number of neurons, so the actual brain cells, not just the support cells, but the ones that are actually responsible for transmitting signals across the brain, and has worked out that our initial assumptions that the bigger the brain, the better, and the bigger the brain, the bigger the neuron, and the bigger the brain, the more supporting hardware, if you like, so insulation and mechanisms to be able to transmit all of these signals, is in fact wrong. They've known for quite some time. Yes, I know it's a bit like, let's get our facts straight, because they've known for a long time that the bigger brain isn't necessarily better. For example, a cow has a much bigger brain than, say, a monkey. But monkeys can usually do a little bit more than cows do. Their complexity is somewhat different. They're able to manipulate things, they can sort problems, they can, crack nuts and the like. But cows don't tend to do that kind of thing. They chew and they poo and they produce milk and they have interactions and the like, but the level of complexity is not the same. So for a long time it was assumed that just meant that the larger animal had larger neurons, therefore they couldn't pack as much in. So that means that a smaller brain can in fact have greater complexity and the animal can do more things simply because of the size and the way the neurons have been packed in. And while that does work to a certain extent, it's actually not terribly relevant to humans. We do have a big brain for our size, as I said before, but that doesn't mean that it's any different than you would expect for a primate of our size. This lady, Susana Hernandez, who I can't remember exactly her name, but it's fantastic. You've got to read the article. It was brilliant. She was able to take soups, various brains, everything from rodents like capybaras and rats and mice and any other kind of rodent you can think of. I worked out that there's a scale, if you like, of the number of brain cells that you would expect to see relevant to size. She found a fairly linear relationship, so you don't see anything really out of the ordinary. Tried it with primates, and actually it's very much the same. Humans, and yes, she did make human brain soup, are just the same. You would expect for a human of our size, we're primates, that we've got roughly the right number of neurons. We've got about 86 billion neurons, and each brain weighs about 1,500 grams, so 1.5 kilos. Fairly average. Gorillas, on the other hand, even though they have a brain that doesn't quite seem right for their size, it's actually the body size that's gone wrong, not the brain, if you like. We're emphasising the wrong part. Their bodies have gotten out of control. They're too big for what you would expect for a brain of that size. So it means that the rules for primates are different than they are for rodents. And all these things were never known before. There was never a proper count of the number of cells in various brains. People have just guessed over the years. They've extrapolated. No one's actually done the count. I hadn't known that before. I thought it was a fact. So the fact now is around about 86 billion neurons as opposed to 100.
So you've got to wonder, what is the point in all that other brain space and all that other brain matter going on? It seems like it's wasted, Janine.
I don't think anything in a brain is necessarily wasted. You would think that it's actually evolved over time for a reason. Evolution's not necessarily interested in things looking tidy, though, or being neat. Evolution has just worked its way through over the last million or so years, and you've wound up with functions that, work. And that's ultimately what matters. The brain isn't just about neural cells, though, the ones that transmit signals. There's also a bunch of support cells. They're known as glia. Now, these glia were always thought to be useless, They're actually not. They're incredibly important for being able to transmit these signals and for the way our brains work. Turns out the relationship they thought was, roughly 10 support cells to one neuron is actually wrong. It's closer to 1 to 1. So the waste or whatever appears to be in the brain may not in fact be the case. It appears that everything that's there is there for a reason. And so trying to work out why humans are so special, for want of a better word, could in fact come down to various other parts of the brain. It could be the neocortex, for example. That could be the newest part of the brain that's developed. It could be the cerebellum. They're not sure. We don't frankly know what makes us special, but we're the only ones that cook our food. We're the only ones that seem to have a concept of religion that we know about, and that's the thing, you can't know what's going on in other species. But clearly we're different, and once again we're back to not being sure of why.
Well, Janine, from brains to fevers, the time-honoured approaches to treat fevers could be misguided, in fact, could be potentially life-threatening.
Yes, for a long time it's been thought that fever is a bad thing, and that's come out of the idea of something called homeostasis. Our body is meant to function within various bounds. You know, you're not meant to go below, say, 36 degrees, and you're not meant to go above 38, 39, 40 degrees for the human body because it's bad for you. If you get too hot, then bad things happen. I think most people would know about what happens when our body overheats, and particularly for children, they have a thing called a febrile convulsion. Anyone who's seen a child or known of a child going through it, it's scary. It's terrible. No one wants their child to go through these things. So for a long time, it's now been suggested that if you get above 38.5 degrees, you should take aspirin or paracetamol or ibuprofen and bring the fever down. However, fever is a natural human process when fighting off things like infections. It's been shown recently, and people have known for a long time, but you're now starting to get the scientific evidence behind it, that bacteria, particularly the meningococcal bacterium, Neisseria meningococcus B, there's my tongue twister for the morning, actually survives very badly at 40 degrees compared to, say, 37, which is meant to be average. Did you know there's actually very few average human temperatures? Some people function as low as 35.5. Some people function average around 38.
Huh.
Who knew that? Yeah, exactly. My mother, for example, my mother used to live at 36.5 degrees. We knew she had a fever when she went up to 37.
Yeah.
So everybody's different. And the way our bodies respond is different. But fever is a universal, ancient mechanism to fight off infections. It happens right across the animal world. Birds, amphibians, reptiles, they all get fevers as well. So the prospect of taking fever down a lot sooner than perhaps you should has implications for the way you treat disease. Pete, there's been only 1 or 2 clinical trials. It's very hard to be able to do this, and a lot of observational studies have been done, but they're not kind of the gold standard in science. You want randomised clinical trials. They've found that using the standard treatment of giving, say, paracetamol or aspirin at 38.5 degrees was actually causing more people, they believed, more people to die than those who were allowed to have their fever go up to 4 degrees and then given some kind of antipyretic. And they stopped the trial because they were thinking it was unethical to keep people on the standard treatment instead of this new revised treatment. What they're advocating now is that realistically you shouldn't be giving until close to 40 degrees because it's causing more problems. And if they're giving these treatments to people, 50% of the people that come into an ICU, for example, that don't have any complicating factors like, say, stroke, then you're not 100% sure of what this is doing, and potentially it could be causing more harm than good. So, changing the way the body fights off infections and the like by taking that fever down, because for 100 years, fever was actually a treatment. They would induce fever in people with things like syphilis, and it could be over 50 hours of having this induced fever. Even after 5, they could still see an improvement in the symptoms. So it was killing off the organism. So suddenly we've moved from having fever as a treatment, and a very standard, accepted, effective treatment, to trying to take fever down because fever is meant to be a bad thing. So we need to change the way we think about fever. And so it should be for the average person even. Don't take aspirin or ibuprofen if you've got a cold.
Yeah.
Because realistically, it's actually the way your body might be fighting it off.
Sounds like a mind shift. Thanks very much to you, Janine.
See you next week.
That is Janine Young from New Scientist magazine. Those stories you'll find in New Scientist magazine, which comes out next week. And also check out the website as well, New Scientist.